Coming up on Network Africa, at least 21 people killed and over 70 others wounded by shelling at a busy market in southeastern Sudan. Ethiopia warns against invasion into the country amid regional tensions with Somalia and Egypt. Plus, Morocco's mountain community is still rebuilding a year after the deadly earthquake that killed thousands of people. Hello and welcome to the program today. I'm Layo Olarinde. We begin this week with stories and happenings that made headlines over the weekend.
On Sunday, at least 50 persons were killed after a tanker explosion on the Agaye section of Lapa-Agaye Road in Niger State, north-central Nigeria, where the incident involved a petrol tanker loaded with premium motor spirits that collided with a trailer truck carrying passengers, cattle, and sheep. Two other vehicles, a crane truck and a pickup van, were also caught in the blaze, intensifying the devastation. Eyewitnesses attribute the accident to the bad state of the federal road, which has become a death trap for road users. On Saturday, the death toll from a Kenya boarding school fire rose to 21. The death toll increased after 2 people succumbed to injuries while undergoing treatment. The fire ripped through the hillside Endarasha Academy in Yeri, a primary boarding school for young students about 150 kilometers from the capital, Nairobi. Government spokesperson Isaac Mwara says the pupils were in grades 4 to 8, putting their ages at about 9 to 13 years old. Authorities say they expect to recover more bodies and investigations will take a long time.
So we expect, if at all there are fatalities, to recover more bodies. And he's here today on the ground to make sure that all is well. So without much ado, it's a DNA process that will take quite a number of time, a long time, I beg your pardon. So please, a number of days. So don't really rush to make conclusions about the numbers. Because at this point in time, we cannot really say how is it.
Algeria's President Abdelmadjid Tebboune has been re-elected for a second term. The Independent Authority for Elections released preliminary results on Sunday, showing Mr. Tebboune received 5,329,253 votes, or 94.65% of the total. His nearest competitor, Abdelali Hassani Sharif, garnered 178,797 votes, or 3.17%. According to regulations, the country's Constitutional Council will review any appeals from the candidates before finalizing the results. The presidential election was held on Saturday with more than 23 million citizens eligible to vote.
At least 21 people are known to have died in Sudan after shelling hit a busy market area in the city of Sennar. The Sudan Doctors Network is accusing the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, of being responsible for the attack, condemning it as a massacre of civilians. Now, this happened a day after Sudan's military rejected a proposal by UN experts to send in an international force to protect civilians. Thousands of people have been killed and more than 10 million have fled their homes since civil war broke out between the army and the RSF last April, and it's made the war in Sudan one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Meanwhile, the Sudanese government says it is rejecting in its entirety the recommendations suggested by the United Nations last week on the protection of civilians in the ongoing civil war. A fact-finding mission by the UN said they had made harrowing discoveries which may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity by both warring factions. The mission called for the deployment of an independent and impartial force with a mandate to safeguarding civilians. However, this has been angrily rebuked by the Foreign Ministry, which is loyal to the Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, calling the UN Human Rights Council behind the mission a political and illegal body. The Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, on the other hand, is yet to comment. Well, several rounds of peace talks brokered by Saudi Arabia and the US have failed to end the 17-month crisis. And still on Sudan, the head of the World Health Organization, WHO, is calling on the world to wake up and help Sudan as it enters 17 months of conflict. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus was speaking during a visit to Port Sudan. That's the main hub for aid agencies and the new headquarters of the government after it was driven out of the capital, Khartoum, by the RSF. Well, Dr. Ghebreyesus also said he was shocked by the world's insufficient action to stop the crisis in Sudan. And this is after visiting a children's hospital that's caring for malnourished infants in Port Sudan over the weekend.
The conflict has left some 25 million people, more than half of the country's population, in dire need of humanitarian aid. Of these, 14.7 million require urgent assistance for a range of life-saving support, for which the humanitarian sector has requested $2.7 billion, which is less than half funded. But we must focus on all people in need, all 25 million people. And this means additional resources are required to meet their needs. And we're calling on the world to wake up and help Sudan out of the nightmare it's living through. According to available data, Sudan's conflict has so far killed more than 20,000 people. This is an underestimate, by the way. Displaced over 10 million people inside the country and forced another 2 million to flee to neighboring countries. This is the largest internal displacement of people in the world today. The scale of the emergency is shocking, and as is the insufficient action being taken to curtail the conflict and respond to the suffering it's causing.
Joining us now is a security expert, Chidi Wonu, for more on this. Thank you so much for your time on Network Africa.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with the proposals of the United Nations to, the warring factions in Sudan. The UN says, given the failure of the warring parties to spare civilians, it is proposing a deployment of an international force to protect these civilians. But the army has rejected this. Why do you think this was rejected? Because the UN is saying, it's for the protection of civilians.
Well, I think there's several factors here, but the first one, to answer your question directly, why did the army reject it, is because they still feel they have a chance of winning this war, and or at least rather the commanders feel they have a chance of winning this war, and it's not in their interest to have a foreign military force interfering with the conflict from their point of view. The second element is that even if the international community proposes an international force, where are they going to find the troops to man it, to resource it, to pay for it? It's very unlikely that there's any country that's going to, be able to contribute the number of troops and the amount of support that's needed to operate in a country as vast as Sudan and with as many competing and warring factions that exist there.
Now, the fact-finding mission also called for an arms embargo to be imposed on both sides involved in the conflict. And we have been seeing accusations on the United Arab Emirates, accused of supporting the RSF with money and guns. And also Saudi Arabia is accused of having close ties with the government. But will this arms embargo help?
An arms embargo would help, but much like everything, the devil is in the detail. It needs to be enforced. So there was already UN sanctions on Sudan. There's already certain embargoes in place, but that doesn't prevent states who do not wish to abide by it from doing so. So the UAE is quite well known to be supplying the RSF via Chad. The Libyans or the Russians as well are supporting the RSF using their Proxy Forces Africa Corps, or Wagner as it used to be called. There's so many different factions fighting, each other on one side or the other. That an arms embargo is completely pointless because, again, it goes back to the previous question of who is going to enforce this arms embargo. Unless there is a major power that is going to commit the amount of military resource needed to secure a peace and also to enforce an arms embargo, you could have one, but it's not going to be enforced and it won't make a difference.
So with all that you've said, Mr. Wano, what really can bring an end to this conflict? It's been 17 months of war and crisis, humanitarian crisis. The Sudan is dealing with famine and, malnutrition amongst the children. There's a whole lot in the country. What can really bring an end to this?
Well, it's very clear that the leaders on both sides do not care about the Sudanese people and the effects that this war is having on the Sudanese people. So one of the key ways to end this war is for the leaders on both sides to be removed. There is nothing to say that the people who would replace them are going to be any better, but it might be one solitary step, towards resolving the Sudanese issue. The second, maybe more effective one, will be removing the foreign actors. Neither side is particularly militarily competent, and what's helped them has been the support they've been getting from foreign actors. The Sudanese armed forces has benefited from drone technology as well as some limited special forces support from Ukraine. That's not been decisive, but for the RSF, what's been decisive for them has been the support from the UAE. If both of these, if all the foreign supporters are removed from this conflict, they would lose their ability to fight and they would most likely come to the negotiating table much quicker.
All right, then. Thank you so much, Chidi Wanu, security expert. Thank you for your insights on the program.
Thank you for having me.
We're seeing regional tensions in the Horn of Africa, with Ethiopia's Prime Minister warning against any invasion into his country. Mr. Abiy Ahmed did not mention any particular country, but this comment is coming at a time of rising tensions with neighboring Somalia and Egypt. In a televised address marking Ethiopia's Sovereignty Day, Mr. Abiy said the East African nation had no intention of creating conflict. However, anyone planning on invading his country should think 10 times before doing so, because any attack would be repelled. Well, tensions are rising in the region. Somalia has described a maritime pact that Mr. Abiy's government signed earlier this year with Somaliland as an act of aggression and responded to this by forging closer military ties with Egypt. Egypt, on the other hand, has been involved in a long-running dispute of its own with Ethiopia over Addis Ababa's decision to build a large dam on a tributary on the River Nile. It is reportedly planning to send troops to Somalia following the signing of a military pact between the two governments last month. Now, Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan has denounced the brutal killing of a senior member of the main opposition party, Chadema, who was kidnapped, beaten, and then doused with acid. On Friday, Mohammed Ali Kibawa was reportedly forced off a bus by suspected security agents while traveling from the country's biggest city, Dar es Salaam, to his hometown, Tanga. His body was found in Uninyo, the waterfront district of Dar es Salaam. Now, the post-mortem found that Mr. Kibawa had been severely beaten and had acid poured on his face. Well, President Samia has condemned this as brutal acts and called for an investigation into the murder. Let's take a break now on the program. Still ahead, Nairobi hosts a concert for struggling Haiti to increase funding and awareness. Please join us again. Welcome back to the program. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has ended his visit to China, one which he says was very successful. He rated himself when he spoke with Nigerians in diaspora. Our foreign affairs correspondent, Amarachi Ubani, sums up the visit and what Nigeria may or may not have achieved with the president's visit.
A warm and colorful arrival to Beijing, China, and President Bola Tinubu kicked off his visit to the country with much expectation. Just like other presidential visits, he was expected to engage in a one-on-one discussion with Chinese President Xi Jinping, where both would table issues of mutual interests. He was also expected to sign new deals that will boost Nigeria's economic partnership with the country and leave Nigeria feeling richer as China's #1 partner in Africa. According to the presidency, all of that did take place. The president did hold a one-on-one meeting with the Chinese president, and both later announced the elevation of China-Nigeria relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership.
Mr. President.
Discussions filtered to economic cooperation, and both witnessed the signing of mutual cooperation documents related to China's Belt and Road Initiative and other economic development projects. And what's a presidential visit to another country without a chit-chat with the Nigerian community, where he charges Nigerians in China to be good ambassadors?
What is uppermost in my mind is for you to represent Nigeria. Nigeria for development. Nigeria for good citizenship. Here you are one of us, and we have to encourage you to be good ambassadors, all of you.
So did the president have a good outing in China? Career diplomat and former deputy head of mission of the Nigerian embassy in Beijing, Ambassador Chuka Udedibia, says Nigeria needs to be focused on something else: implementation of agreements and balancing of common interests.
We are sovereign countries and should relate to other sovereign countries on bilateral basis as sovereign nations. And each country established what we call joint commissions to handle their relations, their bilateral economic relations. There is also trade in services. There are so many aspects of bilateral relations. How have we fared in all these other areas?
He eventually answers the question about the president raising his visit a very successful one.
Nigerian president, not just Bola Tinubu, but other presidents in the past, have been doing exactly the same thing. Because I was deputy head of mission in China. We saw China grow. When it started, we witnessed some of these things. And that's our job. We were writing reports, we were advising the government, this is the route to take. This is how Nigeria can benefit from till date. That has not been done.
As with all state visits, the achievements may only be noticed in the coming months. And with the president so confident already, we'll just have to wait and see. Amarachi Ubani, Channel Television News.
Well, Zambia's President Hakainde Hichilema believes the 10 partnership action plans proposed by President Xi Jinping at the just concluded 2024 summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation will uplift the living standards of the African people. Well, President Hichilema was in Beijing attending the summit alongside counterparts from other African countries. He says President Xi's plans offer clear guidance on the path of partnership between China and the continent.
Important thing is that the 10 focal areas that President Xi Jinping raised, and we appreciate his and his government and the people of China for their invitation for this focus, is really to focus on working together, how Africa, China can work together on the path of development, total development, economic development, investment, trade, and also other sectors, education, culture, social issues, uplifting the living standards of our people, food security, energy security, not just energy security, but energy which comes with the face of justice and equity, meaning affordability, even for those that are off the grid, those that live in the outskirts of our countries, our continent, continent Africa, our countries must benefit from the technological developments that are taking place, amongst ourselves. China, I think, leading the way here. Various other resource endowments that we have. For example, a country like Zambia and other African countries are endowed with the critical minerals: copper, cobalt, nickel, manganese, lithium group, and other minerals that are key to the world's green revolution. I think it does benefit the world that the more we gravitate towards cleaner energy, green economies, green copper, green cobalt, so to say, and energy itself, then we'll make the world much safer, more sustainable for the generations to come. I think that's how it benefits the world. More than that, jobs will not just be created in African countries on the continent, but also here in China. And the products that come out of those processes, value addition, industrialization, will service someone within Africa, China, but outside of this bloc, China, Africa. Jobs will be created beyond Africa and China. So this is really an important development going beyond Africa and China, but for the global community.
Well, for Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa, his country has taken note of how they can take part in joint efforts to advance global modernization. Mr. Mnangagwa says his conversation with the Chinese president, as well as his speech at the FOCAC summit, provided key insights as Zimbabwe charts its course towards development and prosperity.
For us, Zimbabwe, I have no doubt that we have listened to Houston very, very carefully. Mm-hmm. And last night we spent some time with my delegation analyzing that and how we as Zimbabwe can adapt some of the things to fit into our own concrete situation, our concrete transformation journey. What can we get in order to enhance our own view to achieve our own vision? So it's so broad, and I believe that every single African country which is here will find a place, a niche in the global vision which he presented.
It is 1 year after a powerful earthquake struck Morocco, yet the mountain communities most affected by the quake are still working to rebuild their lives. In Amizmiz, one of the larger towns in the hard-hit Al-Hahouz region, most of the buildings remain damaged as they were in the aftermath of the earthquake. The 6.8 magnitude quake, the biggest to hit the North African country in 120 years, struck on September 8, 2023 and killed nearly 3,000 people. Well, many buildings in villages and towns around the high Atlas Mountains, like in Amizmiz, were reduced to rubble. Some homes have been able to rebuild and others are under construction with new foundations being dug and bricks being laid. However, residents say the process of restoring normal life has been slow to begin. And finally, on the program, Kenya is trying to raise more awareness and funding for Haiti with its latest initiative, the Harmony for Haiti concert. At Nairobi's Uhuru Park, the concert and a cultural festival was organized aimed at raising awareness and funds to support humanitarian initiatives in Haiti. The concert featured performances by top artists, with proceeds going towards protecting the vulnerable populations in Haiti, providing food and health care, and addressing the country's severe hunger crisis. Haiti has been ravaged by violence. A year ago, the Caribbean country had to ask for help to fight the violent gangs that have largely overrun its capital, Port-au-Prince. So Kenya stepped up, and around 400 police officers arrived in Port-au-Prince in June and July from an expected total of 1,000.
Issues of security and peace, we must take it a notch higher. We must graduate from national security to regional security to international security, and then ultimately to human security. Human security is the ultimate objective of this initiative.
Our Kenyan, our African brothers and sisters, we, the people of the Caribbean, thank you for joining the world, and not just joining, but in leading, by looking over the waters and across the seas that connect us to each other, and by offering a hand that helps.
And that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.